it's a 911 call that's, honestly, it's almost too painful to even listen to. You've got 13-year-old Stevie Bellish coming home from school. She is just bursting with excitement, right? She wants to tell her mom all about this boy she likes. But instead, she walks right into a literal nightmare. The raw emotion, the sheer panic in her voice when she discovers her 35-year-old mother, Sheila, murdered on the kitchen floor, it is absolutely chilling. And you know what makes it even more horrific? Wandering around that crime scene, totally alone, are Stevie's 4 siblings, her 23-month-old quadruplet siblings. They aren't physically hurt, thank goodness, but they have blood in their hair, it's on their clothes. It's just a chaotic, deeply tragic scene that left an entire community reeling and seasoned investigators completely baffled.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a truly complex, multi-state conspiracy. It's what investigators actually call an inside-out case. You see, when law enforcement walks into a scene and there's no immediate aha moment, no obvious suspect jumping at them, they have to start at the absolute center. That means starting with the bloody, chaotic crime scene itself, and methodically, almost painfully, working their way outward, layer by layer, suspect by suspect, all the way until they finally hit the shadowy mastermind who's actually pulling the strings. So let's break down exactly how investigators unraveled this crazy web.
So the date is November 7th, 1997, where in Sarasota, Florida, Sheila Bellush is a stay-at-home mom, and the family had literally just moved to this neighborhood 6 weeks prior. Out of nowhere, she's subjected to this incredibly brutal attack. But here's the thing that detectives noticed the second they walked in. Sheila did not go down easily. Despite weighing barely over 100 pounds, the evidence at the scene pointed to a ferocious, practically unbelievable struggle. Detectives believe her motherly instinct just totally took over. It gave her this superhuman strength to fight back fiercely against her attacker. Why? Because she was making a desperate bid to protect those 4 toddlers standing right there in the room with her.
Okay, so the physical evidence instantly pushed the investigation down 2 very distinct paths. First up, absolutely no forced entry. No broken windows, no pried locks, nothing. That immediately made detectives think, wait, maybe Sheila actually knew her killer. Maybe she let him in. Then, inside the utility room, they found a single .45 caliber shell casing. The attacker had actually shot Sheila in the face, which, usually puts anyone down immediately, but no, she kept fighting. So then the attacker grabs a kitchen knife right out of Sheila's own knife block to use against her. We can see obvious defensive wounds on her hands and arms, proving she fought back. She even managed to drag herself 15 feet toward the kitchen phone before she passed away. And finally, investigators managed to pull one tiny, almost random little clue from that utility room, a partial latent fingerprint, just sitting right there on the clothes dryer.
Following that whole inside-out method we talked about, detectives first looked really closely at the people immediately in Sheila's life. I mean, statistically speaking, most women are killed by someone they know, right? But man, they hit a dead end so fast. First, they looked at her current husband, Jamie Bellish. He's a pharmaceutical salesman, and yeah, he had a life insurance policy on Sheila. But he had an absolute ironclad alibi. We're talking receipts and witnesses from his sales route that entire day. Then, there was a former pool maintenance guy who had kind of creeped the family out. But he voluntarily gave hair, blood, and DNA and was completely 100% cleared. And finally, they looked at Sheila's ex-husband, Alan Blackthorne. Now, they had a notoriously bitter history, but his alibi checked out too. He was verified to be 1,000 miles away in San Antonio, Texas. So that immediate circle, completely cleared. They were right back to square one.
But then, the most incredible turning point of the entire investigation comes from, of all things, a simple knock on a neighbor's door. Detectives ended up chatting with a local gardener named Jake Mast. Now, Mast had noticed this really suspicious white Mitsubishi Eclipse parked nearby earlier in the day, and he saw a guy walking around wearing camouflage pants who just looked wildly out of place for that neighborhood. In fact, Mast was actually so unnerved by this guy that he memorized the car's license plate. And the way he did it is wild. He used this bizarre personal mnemonic device, Bob and 62 Girls. You heard that right. That random phrase helped him remember the exact letters and numbers, YBR62G.
So detectives immediately run that plate, YBR62G, through the Florida DMV. And nothing. Crickets. But remembering that the Bellish family had just moved from Texas 6 weeks ago, they decide to ask the Texas Rangers to run it on their end. Bingo. The plate comes back registered to a white Mitsubishi Eclipse. The owner, a 23-year-old San Antonio man named Joey Del Toro. Just like that, in a split second, this local Sarasota murder transforms into a massive, multi-state manhunt. Now, Texas authorities couldn't actually locate Del Toro himself right away. Turns out he had already fled across the border to Mexico. But they did find his abandoned Mitsubishi parked outside a friend's apartment. And let me tell you,
what was inside was an absolute forensic treasure trove. We are talking about a physical map leading directly to Sheila's Sarasota home. Those exact camouflage pants the gardener saw, they were in there, and they had tiny blood spatters perfectly matching Sheila's DNA. They also found a .45 caliber pistol, which ballistics definitively proved fired the exact bullet found at the crime scene. And the ultimate nail in the coffin, a fingerprint right there on the gun's trigger that not only matched Del Toro's record, but also perfectly matched that mysterious partial fingerprint left on Sheila's clothes dryer. Joey Del Toro was, undeniably, without a doubt, the trigger man.
But see, this raises a massive, deeply chilling question. Joey Del Toro was just this 23-year-old small-time criminal who liked to party. He had absolutely zero connection to Sheila Belush. They had literally never crossed paths. So why on earth would he drive nonstop all the way from Texas to Florida for the sole purpose of murdering a stay-at-home mom right in front of her toddlers? It makes no sense. So we're pivoting now. We're moving from who pulled the trigger to the much, much darker question of why. We are officially stepping into the conspiracy.
Once investigators finally tracked down and squeezed Del Toro's cousin, Sammy Gonzalez, the dominoes really began to fall. Here's the chain of command they managed to uncover. Down at the bottom, you have Joey Del Toro, who actually executes the hit for a $10,000 payout. But he didn't come up with the plan. He was recruited by his cousin, Sammy Gonzalez, who worked in a golf course pro shop. Now, Gonzalez, in turn, was approached by a bookie named Danny Rocha. Rocha is the guy who organized the whole plot, handed over the map, and provided a photo of Sheila, which of course points us straight up to the very top. A mysterious, wealthy funder who provided the money, the targeting materials, and the incredibly sick motive.
Del Toro did eventually confess to everything, but man, he was absolutely terrified. He told the FBI that there was this incredibly powerful, wealthy man sitting way above the bookie who ordered the hit. And Del Toro honestly lived in constant fear that this mastermind would come after his own family if he didn't go through with it. Investigators soon discovered that the bookie, Danny Rocha, only organized this horrific crime because he was desperately trying to secure funding for a new sports bar he wanted to open. So the big question is, who was the mysterious millionaire dangling a sports bar loan in exchange for blood?
The mastermind was Alan Blackthorne, Sheila's ex-husband. Yup, the very same man that local police had cleared on day one because he was sitting comfortably in Texas while the murder went down in Florida. Blackthorne had completely, intentionally insulated himself through all these layers of middlemen so he wouldn't get his hands dirty.
The terrifying duality of Alan Blackthorne is honestly hard to even comprehend. To the general public, he was this massive, shining success story. He had actually changed his name just to sound like a character out of a romance novel, built a $40 million medical device business, and was this super charismatic, outgoing fixture at the local country club. But behind closed doors, his private reality was an absolute nightmare. He was a manipulative, deeply dangerous sociopath. During their marriage, he subjected Sheila to profound emotional and physical abuse. He engaged in these bizarre cross-dressing games, forced cruel sexual rituals, even bringing other people into their home and forcing her to watch. He controlled her food, her weight, her movements. He just possessed this terrifying, all-consuming need for absolute dominance.
This whole tragedy was really the culmination of a decade of torment. Sheila originally filed for divorce way back in 1987, and for an entire decade after that, Blackthorne tormented her. He dragged her through relentless, vicious custody battles, even fabricating totally fake claims of child abuse just to ruin her emotionally and financially. He simply fundamentally couldn't stand losing control over her. By the summer of 1997, terrified that Blackthorne was escalating his behavior, Sheila and her new husband essentially packed up their 6 kids and fled to Florida in the middle of the night, telling practically no one where they were going. But Blackthorne tracked her down anyway. On November 7, 1997, she was murdered. Finally, years later, on January 5, 2000, the FBI arrested Blackthorne. And you know what's deeply ironic? They arrested him right on a golf course, the exact type of environment where he had originally hatched this murderous plot with his bookie.
Now you might be wondering, how in the world did the FBI finally nail a guy who technically never left the state of Texas? Because he used all those middlemen, prosecuting him locally was going to be incredibly difficult. But the FBI utilized a very specific, very clever federal statute: interstate travel to commit domestic violence. Because this entire conspiracy was hatched in Texas, but the violent act itself was carried out across state lines in Florida, it officially became a federal crime. This was a brilliant legal maneuver. It allowed the FBI to completely bypass all those local jurisdiction hurdles and go straight for the head of the snake. But wait,
They still needed hard, physical proof that Blackthorne was the one who actually supplied the hitman with the intelligence. Well, when the FBI finally executed a search warrant on Blackthorne's multi-million-dollar mansion, they hit absolute pay dirt. Get this, here's what they found inside. First, they pulled up a computer-driven map finder guide that pointed exactly to the random Sarasota, Florida address Sheila had secretly fled to. And even more damning than that, they found a set of family photos, but one specific print from a birthday party was noticeably missing from the set. Guys, it was the exact same photograph the hitman had been given to identify Sheila. The physical link was totally undeniable.
2. That is the number of concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole that Alan Blackthorne received in a federal courtroom. Throughout the entire trial, he just maintained this cocky, arrogant smirk, firmly believing that his millions and his layers of middlemen made him completely untouchable. But the jury? They saw right through him. While the hitman, the cousin, and the bookie all received massive prison sentences themselves, it was the mastermind's conviction that finally, legally, closed the loop for Sheila's surviving children.
We've unraveled the layers of this inside-out conspiracy today, working our way from a tragic, bloody kitchen floor in Florida all the way back to a Texas mansion. But I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Alan Blackthorne spent years successfully hiding his horrific, controlling nature right behind a $40 million fortune, a charismatic smile, and a fancy country club membership. So, if a family murder this incredibly calculated could masquerade in plain sight for so long, what other private horrors are out there, just hiding behind the perfect public mask? It really makes you rethink the true nature of deception, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning what you see on the surface.